Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Dawn Moon and Theresa W. Tobin, authors of a new book titled Choosing Love, What LGBT plus Christians Can Teach Us About Relationships, Inclusion, and Justice. Dawn is a qualitative sociologist who studied religion, gender, sexuality, and people's struggles to define who we are for 30 years. The author of God, Sex, and Politics, Homosexuality and Everyday Theologies. She's professor in social and cultural sciences and co-director of gender and sexuality studies at Marquette University. Theresa W. Tobin is a philosopher who researches ethical questions around gender, sexuality and religion, emotions, and spiritual violence. She's associate professor of philosophy at Marquette University, where she also directs the Education Preparedness Program, which creates pathways to higher education for people directly impacted by incarceration. You can learn more about the book from Oxford Press at academic.oup.com. So Dawn and Theresa, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on all of your work.
Thank
You.
you, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
So first, is there anything else that you'd like people to know about each of you?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I grew up going to Methodist church and it never really made a lot of sense to me. And I stopped, in my late teens. And then in graduate school, I ended up studying churches. And so I've studied religion and sexuality since the 90s. Uh, a lot of people think that's no accident, right? I'm trying to figure out things that have never made a lot of sense to me, and I think that what's interesting to me is like giving other people a place to sort of try and put to words things they don't have words for.
Hmm.
So that's
Cool.
that's me.
And
So about you?
I grew up Catholic. I'm still Catholic, and but I grew up, as I share briefly in the book, I grew up sort of on the other side of the culture war. I was taught that LGBTQ folks were outside of God's love, and I really grew up with kind of subtle but also quite clear messages about that. And it wasn't really until I was in my early 20s and started reading and thinking about feminist philosophy and reading more of different kinds of theology, and then actually just meeting and befriending LGBTQ folks and really learning who they are and their stories, that I really had kind of my mind blown and changed, and really have been compelled by these questions about these narratives and where they come from, and the harm they cause, and how to heal and navigate past those. As for the next generation, I'm a parent. I'm thinking about my own kids and their faith journeys too. So that's why this is really compelling and important for me personally, and then also philosophically, and working with and meeting Dawn has been really life-changing for me professionally and personally. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, good for you. It's like, so many times I get frustrated by authors because maybe they'll do a really good job of analysis of some issues, but there's very little about, okay, what do we do about it?
Mm.
You guys have clearly through your lives tried to answer that question. What do we do about it? What do we do about solving the problem, not just recognizing it or analyzing it?
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So let's get into the book now. As I mentioned, the title is Choosing Love, What the LGBTQ plus Christians Can Teach Us All About Relationships, Inclusion, and Justice. So how did this book come about?
Well, so I mean, I think I can start.
Yeah.
So back in like, I don't know, 2012 or so, um, one of my partner's cousins, who grew up evangelical, came out as gay, and his brother-in-law was trying to figure out what the proper Christian response should be. And he wrote to me, and at first I was like, "What? Me? Why would you ask me?" And we had a conversation back and forth for, over several months. And I forwarded him things to read. He forwarded me things that he was reading so that I could read them, and we talked about them. And he was sending me things that were coming from this, LGBTQ plus evangelical movement, from organizations. And I was like, wait, this is happening? I had studied debates about homosexuality in the United Methodist Church. That was the book you mentioned before. But I had moved away from that, and I had actually been studying in part the Jewish-Palestinian dialogue movement,
Mm.
and there are elements of dialogue going on among evangelicals, and it just felt like everything in my life had led to this moment.
Mm.
And so I started, one of it was a blog or something that that my cousin Gabe had shared with me, came from the Marin Foundation, which when I read it at first, I thought Marin County, Marin. I just kind of associated it with California. And then I realized they were actually down the street from me in Chicago. And I was like, okay, maybe I could start there. Like, what is happening? So, yeah. And then I don't know, maybe Theresa wants to pick
Yeah,
up.
sure. So, I'm a moral philosopher, and I've always been interested in questions about, questions about moral disagreement, how to improve moral understanding in divisive contexts about contentious issues. And so
Mm.
that's always been a theme of interest for me philosophically. In the early 2000s, I became really interested in this concept of spiritual violence.
Mm.
And I came to that concept by reading testimony from survivors of clergy sexual abuse. And a
Mm.
lot of people had been talking about the physical harm and the emotional harm, but a lot of survivors were naming spiritual harm, the way they were distinctively harmed in their spiritual capacities to be able to have healthy or any relationship with God or be part of a faith community any longer, that because they'd been abused by religious people, leaders in ritual spaces using religious language, their capacity to connect with the divine and have their spirituality healthy was actually violated. And in some cases, it seemed irreparably violated, at least in
Mm.
the traditional religious sense. And that was a harm that philosophers, I think, had overlooked. And a lot of people weren't really talking about, at least that I had known about. And so I just became, and I think I resonated with it because I'm not a survivor in that way, but I'm in a faith community that is definitely, I felt resonance with the concept, the idea that religion or spiritual leaders and traditions could actually harm people in their faith. I thought that was just like, oh, I resonated with that. I've had my own versions of that. And so Dawn and I actually were introduced by another colleague at a coffee, a faculty coffee, and this was in like 2007 or something. But university life is hard. There's not a great infrastructure for interdisciplinary collaboration. So we met each other and we realized we had like a lot of similar interests. And it was like, oh my gosh, so nice to meet you. Maybe we'll talk again someday. I hope, but it was hard to do it. There was no structure really to support it. And then in 2014, 2013, the Templeton Religious Trust had a grant opportunity to fund projects, interdisciplinary projects that required a humanities person and a social scientist.
Mm.
And Dawn reached out to me. And at the time, I was pregnant with my twins. And she said, do you want to talk about this? What do you think? And I was like, yes. I don't know how we're going to do it, but yes, I'm about to be on parental leave. But yes, I want to pursue this. And so I'm grateful for her for doing that. And we met at a coffee shop and started brainstorming the spiritual violence piece and the stuff she had been working on sacramental shame, which is this concept she had kind of been kind of milling over. It's now developed in the book. And that's how we got started. I don't know if you want to add to that, Dawn, but
Wow. Well, I mean, that's great to hear. I didn't know all that backstory, clearly.
yeah.
It's fascinating. Um, the book relies heavily on group research that you all conducted, over a period of time. So can you tell folks a little bit more about, how long that lasted, how it was set up, or, how that was orchestrated?
Yeah, yeah. So as a qualitative sociologist, I tend to use both participant observation, meaning like I go a place, I just am there as a person. I'll tell people that I'm doing a study, I'll take notes, but I'm not there as like a white coat with a clipboard, like no one wants to have a conversation with that person in the room, right? So you got to be a human person, right? And like I started off going to the Marin Foundation's discussion groups, And, I would say I'm doing this project. If you don't want to be part of it, you don't have to. I just won't write down anything you say, but I'm going to take some notes if you don't mind. And, as the question came up, sometimes I would just participate, right? And then when Theresa joined the study, she would too. We just went as people doing a study. And from these, situations where people are actually engaging in the conversations themselves that they've brought themselves to because they have things they want to work out, we would invite people to be interviewed. And so we ourselves interviewed, I think, around 90 or so people. And then we realized a few years in that because we're both white, we weren't really making connections with enough people of color. And so because we had this grant, we were able to pay a research assistant, Alicia T. Crosby Mack, to do interviews on top of the ones that we had done with LGBTQ plus Christians of color. And so we ended up with, 100 and, I don't even want to say a number because I'll say it wrong, but 100, under 150, but, low hundreds of interviews. And where it wasn't like, like a survey where there's a bunch of questions. It was just, I would have like a couple notes. I don't know if you did it the same way, Theresa, like in the corner of my notebook, I'd have 2 blank pages in front of me and I'd just be like, all right, so, what's your story? How did you get here? And we would just have a conversation from there. And, people participated because they had a lot of stories. And so, sometimes I did one interview that lasted like 3.5 hours. People just had a lot. A couple of them actually were really long. People had a lot to say.
So your book has a particular focus on people who are both conservative Christians and who identify as LGBTQ plus. Why the specific focus on conservative Christians?
Do you want to
start? Yeah, I can start, and then please feel free. One reason is that people think that the intersection of being an LGBTQ plus person and conservative Christian is impossible. And from all sides, churches saying that you can't actually be a real Christian or be really this kind of Christian and LGBTQ plus person, but also from, secular progressives that say like, God, you certainly can't be that, right? Why don't you leave? Why are you still there? And so, Dawne had already been working in this space, but when I came onto the study and joined her to do the project for this book, it was really, really powerful to learn from the experiences of people who live in what everybody thinks is impossible, as that's their life, their identity, who find healing and thriving, and they just have a perspective and a vantage point that sees a lot that most of us miss, even if it is really important for the rest of us too to know these things. So it was really powerful to explore and learn from and with them about how they experience life, how they experience faith, how they make meaning out of what they're experiencing, and forge paths forward for thriving. That's one reason. Dawne may want.
And conservative Christians are really powerful in this country. And, we need to understand, if we're going to heal our divides, right? There needs to be understanding of what is even happening and seeing, we're talking about people who, who suffer tremendous harm, right? Because, sociologists are kind of skeptical of the concept of a culture war. That doesn't actually exist, because a lot of people have a lot of different complicated opinions, except over gay things, right? LGBTQ plus issues is one where, and now maybe it's a different terrain than it was when some of those studies came out also. But these are people whose lives are the front lines. If it's a battle, I don't know. I have a colleague who says we should stop using war metaphors for everything because we use them so much in our society. But If that's the metaphor that people are thinking in terms of, like, these are the people who are right there. And understanding what they're going through helps us to understand a lot that's not visible, like Theresa was saying. Like exactly what is the harm of denying somebody love, right? Like, what does it feel like to be told that someone loves you when the way that they're acting makes it seem like they just want you to stop existing, right? And like, how do you navigate that, and what does that mean, and what comes out of that?
Mm.
I think it's worth it for all of us to understand all that a little better.
So in the book, you find that conservative Christians tend to see LGBTQ people as having a disordered capacity for eros love, which tarnishes their ability to show other types of love. Can you comment on this?
Yeah. So do you mind if I start? Was that
Not at all. No,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Yeah, like if you see heterosexuality, this very recent concept in history that did not really exist until the late 19th century. But if you see that as God's blueprint for all of creation, like the seed crystal around which all of like the creational order grows, then, you know, somebody being LGBTQ plus seems like a direct attack on God, right? But that's not actually what the Bible says, right? But when people are in this mindset, they treat someone who's LGBTQ plus as if they're given over to sin, right? As if they have chosen this as a direct repudiation of God. Um, and and so we talked to so many people who had this feeling like their capacity to love was dangerous to the people that they loved, right? And
Wow.
like, and they were treated that way. Like we talked to someone who was embracing celibacy as part of his path, and was going to a church that was like, okay, you can say you're gay, we believe you that you're gay, but you have to commit to celibacy. And he's like, all right, I am signing on for that, no problem, let me do that. And they're like, great, we will hug you, you can be a worship leader, you can participate in the life of the church, you're great. And then he got summoned in repeatedly, would be like summoned into his pastor's office, for a talking to, because one time, someone saw him on a date, meaning someone saw him in a restaurant with a person who looked like a man, right? And so he got reported, and it's like, well, you can't have your ministry. We're going to take your ministry away. You're going to be fired if you're on a date. You can't be dating, right? And he had to say, like,
Wow.
what does this mean on a date? Like, am I allowed to leave my house? Can I have a nice time with another person? Do I have to only go out in groups? And is this how street people are treated here? Like if they're not married, they're not supposed to be having sex. Can they go to restaurants? Like, are they allowed to go on a date, or are they going to get called in too? And then the pastors, to their credit, would be like, oh gosh, you're right, huh? We aren't really being fair. But, I mean, it was like, every time he got a call from his pastor, even when he moved on to a different church that was more accepting, he would panic, like, oh, what is it now? And then they'd be like, oh, hey, I wondered if you wanted to go see a movie with me, and he'd be like, really? There's nothing, like, you're not going to, like, rake me over the coals for something? It was traumatizing, right? To be like constantly scrutinized because it meant that they didn't trust him. And why didn't they trust him? Right? It's like this fear that like his sin would like infect everyone around him. And
Mm.
so many people that we talk to were treated that way. Like, you are in sin, and that's infectious. And you might make people doubt God, or you might, make somebody, slip. Or if you love someone and if you were actually to end up being intimate with them, like, they'd go to hell, and that would be on you because you're going to hell too, right? Like, I mean, it was just this, like, don't love anyone. And like, I mean, people who said, like, I cut anyone off who became too close of a friend for fear that, what I felt for them would start to resemble love,
Mm.
right?
Wow. Crazy, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. We had, I think that on the one hand, there's also sort of when people would be talking about, the alleged sinfulness of being an LGBTQ plus person, they're on the one hand sort of defining sexuality very narrowly, but then as Dawn just illustrated through all these stories we heard, it was really people's whole entire ability to just connect with other human beings was policed and surveilled. And
Mm,
one set of parents eventually said, we realized that when we were encouraging our son unintentionally, but to hate his sexuality, we encouraged him to hate himself. That
mm.
that really what was that there's something about your very existence or being in the world that was wrong, and that's unlivable. People have to find their way out of that.
So you also talk in the book about how love is necessary for justice. So how does that work in light of what we just discussed?
Do you want to start, Teresa? Or?
Well, yeah, when I read that question, I actually wanted to hear a little bit more about the question, about, the connection between what your thought was about connecting the question we just talked about with that question. But the first thing I thought of was we are certainly not the first in a long line of people. We're certainly not the first to make a connection between love and justice, that those two things are connected. So I think there's potentially a lot we could say about it, and we do say about it. But one thing is that, you know, a lot of members of these churches will say things like, well, we want to love everyone, but we don't want to get into the justice piece, right? That social justice is taboo. Those conversations are taboo. That's taking us away from God. That's flirting with radical liberals, right? That's those two things are held at a distance, but we love you. We love you. We love you. And I think part of what the experiences that Dawn just shared is that, really thinking through like, well, what do you mean when you say that you love somebody? Right? Are you willing to listen to them? Are you willing to really hear what they're saying when they're telling you that this way they're being treated is harmful, is literally killing them, is unlivable, right? Or are you closed to that? So, prioritizing dogma and certainty, your own certainty about this create God's created plan over the human being that's in front of you that you're claiming to love. And that if you love people, really love them, we have to be willing to approach people with a kind of humility that says, maybe I don't have all the answers. I don't really know. This is freaking me out. I'm not sure what to think. It goes against everything I've ever been taught. And I love you. I want to learn and listen and maybe just for a moment suspend what I think. Maybe I could be wrong. Maybe help me understand, help me learn more, help me, right? So that the commitment to justice of right relationship, like trying to prioritize and either heal or restore or repair, right relationship at every level is prioritized, and that love and justice, you don't really love people if you're unwilling to seek justice for them. And really listen to what they're saying about the way institutions and structures and relationships are harming them. So that's certainly one piece of it, but we're certainly not the first to say that.
No,
Um,
no, no. And I didn't mean that at all. I guess
yeah,
what I was implying from that linkage was that,
yeah,
if the love isn't really love,
yeah,
right, then how can you have justice?
yeah,
Right? That's
yeah,
I guess what I was, the
yes,
implication I was taking out of your section of the book.
yeah, yeah,
Totally. Like if you love somebody, you want them to thrive. You need for them to thrive, and you do what you can so that they thrive. And I think the power of the Christian message is that that Christians are called to love everyone, right? And that would mean then seeing to it that they thrive, right? And when people say, "Oh, we know why we're not thriving. There's a system here that you benefit from that is harming me." To be like, "Well, that's not my problem," right? Is not loving, right? Like that's walking away, right? Like that's the priest and the Levite walking by the man bleeding in the road, where it was the Samaritan who was like, "Oh, you need something, I can give it to you. Let me help you." And that's what seems to get lost, like there's this like idea that to be loving is to like be really nice and talk in a high voice. Right? I was like, oh, I love you. Gotta go, bye. Sorry about the road thing. I hope you're okay. Right? And like that it's not actually or I love you but I hate your sin, right? Like that's not loving. It does not sound like being loved. It does not feel like being loved because there's an arrogance there of I know what your sin is. That's God and me know, and like you're on your own. But I wish you weren't that way, and then you'd be okay. Like that's not loving. But comes packaged in this like, I love you so much. I just wish you could fix yourself and stop being who you are. And like, it's just, that's not loving. And it doesn't lead to a, a world in which the person you claim to love can thrive, right? So there's no justice there. But the flip side of that is also true. Like a lot of times people will be like, justice, I care about justice. And they'll like be so invested in like justice for those people that they won't listen to what those people actually want or
Yeah.
need, right? Like they're not being loving to those people. They're like, I don't care about you. It's your justice that matters, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not actually justice. That's colonizing, right? Like, I know what's best for you. And like the same people who are like anti-colonialist will also be doing this kind of colonizing thing of saying like, oh, I know what's best for you. And that's not justice because it's not rooted in love. Like they go together.
So I'd like to read from a couple of excerpts from an endorsement from one of our other author friends, David Gushee,
Mhm.
who's professor at Mercer University. He says that you describe individuals or organizations working to bring constructive change. So can you mention some of those individuals or organizations?
Sure. Yeah. The main groups that we worked with were what was originally called the Gay Christian Network, founded by Justin Lee. That's now it's kind of evolved into Q Christian Fellowship, which is headed by Bukola Landasayina. Um, and Justin Lee now works more closely with the Reformation Project, which is another organization that we worked closely with that was founded by Matthew Vines. And, so Q Christian Fellowship is really about creating spaces for LGBTQ plus Christians to just exist and thrive. And allies as well. The Reformation Project has a specific a more specific kind of political, I don't know if they would want to call it that, but like an organizational mission to work with churches to actually, sort of teach, how using evangelical scriptural techniques of reading and interpretation, can actually, lead to the conclusion that same-sex marriage is more in line with the narrative and trajectory of Scripture than mandatory celibacy for a whole class of people, right? And so we worked with both of those groups, but there are other groups like Love Boldly, Centerpiece, which is headquartered in Texas. So those are some of the big national groups. And then, we work, like I mentioned, the Marin Foundation. We started working with them after Andrew Marin had sort of, gone to grad school and kind of stepped back a little bit. But it was run for a time by Michael Kimpan and Jason Bilbrey. And then Jason Bilbrey and Alicia Crosby-Mack founded Center for Inclusivity, which is now shuttered. But that was another sort of more local group that we had worked with. So those are the main organizations that we worked with. Are there other people that you want to mention?
Yeah, I just want to mention we also met in these organizations, a lot of people that then went on to do sort of their own ministries or their own blogs or circles of healing and spiritual thriving. So Kevin Garcia would be one
Hmm.
of those people, but also just the unnamed people or the people that are just ordinary kind of foot. Again, I don't want to use the war metaphor, battle metaphor, but just we met so many people. Like I think a lot of this work is actually, yes, there are big organizations bringing people together. There's a movement for sure. And in that movement, there are just so many people in their ordinary day-to-day lives in churches that we met with, really doing this work on the ground in their communities. So I just want to name that.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, I would just mention like Darren Calhoun is
Darren
someone
Calhoun,
very close.
yeah, yeah.
He and Kenji Kuramitsu have done work
Kenji,
with Evangelicals Concerned. I think maybe Miles Markham has as well.
yeah,
And Darren has a podcast called Second Sunday
yeah.
that focuses on the stories of LGBTQ plus African Americans, I think
Hmm.
in particular. Um, and you know, just yeah, like I mean, what was amazing, you know, not being not having come from an evangelical background, it was amazing to me to see how well evangelical ministries equip people for leadership. You know, like, you know, just young people who are just like, all right, we're doing this. And they just like
Yeah.
start an organization and go and like just get things done. So yeah, there were just a lot of really amazing people that we worked with who were both um you know, really, you know, committed to the work that they were doing, but just really like we learned so much from them,
Yeah,
you know, just about like they taught us about love,
yeah.
right? Like, I mean, it was really,
They
uh,
modeled it.
yeah.
Cool. So David Gushee also says that the book modestly but clearly charts at least key hallmarks of a constructive path forward. So can you say a bit about how you view a constructive path forward?
Yeah. Do you want to, you look like you're itching to,
No, no, you go ahead. I do have something, but you start.
okay, okay. Um, so I mean, it seems to me, I'll be interested to see what Teresa's path is. I'm thinking that the path is listening to people when they say that they're hurting, or particularly when they say that we're hurting them, right? Understanding what their experience is, having the humility to
Humility. That was,
realize that
yeah.
yeah, right, that maybe we don't know everything, right? And we don't, none of us does, right? That's being human, right? We all have a standpoint. We are all limited by, you know, where we are in life. Having the humility to be open to information from other people and to realize that maybe we need to grow, maybe we need to rethink things, and then and putting love at the center of our decisions, right? And recognizing that love again is not just like I'm going to try and be nicer to you, which is great. I mean, that's a good first step. A lot of people would really just appreciate, even if people who were terrible to them would just try and be nice, that would be great. But to, you know, recognize that there might be systemic changes that have to happen if the people that we claim to love are going to be able to thrive.
Yeah, and my answer was humility, and all of the things Dawn said I agree with too, but really humility because I think for me, you know, I grew up in a church environment that taught me humility as a virtue and as something really, really important. But it also taught me that humility meant sort of downplaying yourself, you know, kind of getting off center stage, like kind of in a way almost like more like self-deprecating than what I have learned humility to really be. And I was taught that humility was the opposite of pride. And one of the things that I think is important that I learned from this study is that humility is not the opposite of pride. That the two of them are deeply, deeply connected. That the kind of pride that a lot of cisgender or heterosexual Christians or people take for granted is just the basic confidence in one's own like worthiness to be have dignity and be loved, worthiness of relationship. Like that's a kind of pride that gets taken for granted. And the kind of pride that people accuse LGBTQ folks of is as arrogance, is something else. It's putting yourself above other people. It's putting yourself above God. but there is a form of pride that's absolutely essential to affirming my own dignity and for me, and created in God's image and dignified by God. So, I think that, and humility is the other side of that, right? Being able to sort of say, I am human and I have gifts and limitations and I might be wrong, but I also have something to bring forward. And so I prioritize relationship because I know I'm imperfect and I know I'm partial and I know I'm fallible, and I'm social. And so I think humility and pride really become the scaffold for love. And so for me, like really humility to pause and say, I might, maybe we don't know all there is to know. And even if I feel pretty certain about this, I'm open to listening and to being open to the possibility of transformation or not, but at least it's not my job to judge and police and surveil you, right? It's my job to love you, and to fight for your thriving, right? And um, yeah, your flourishing. So I think that humility piece was really, really important.
Good,
And
good.
it's not, yeah, yeah.
Well put. So what would you most like readers to take away from the book?
I think it depends on the reader.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know who's going to read this book, but I think, for me, if people are coming from a place of a non-affirming place or a place that feels like, like I'm not even going to pick this book up because it's got a rainbow cover and says love. If people are coming from that place, I would hope that they would come away with um, uh, humility, with a kind of open, a slightly more open heart to hearing the stories and the wisdom and the insight of the people that shared them with us. That, if people are coming from that place, if people are secular humanists and are just curious about this, I hope they also come away with a sort of, one of the things we talked about in the book is the way that, um, you know, shaming isn't just happening in these places, but like, a kind of toxic shaming happens in a lot of circles. And it looks different, but there's important lessons here about the way that a form of toxic shaming or shaming dynamic doesn't really seem to resolve anything or really help us move forward. So thinking about what it really means to enact a politics of love, and what folks that you might otherwise think like, I got nothing, those people, why don't they, what could they possibly have to teach me? Maybe have something to teach me. So I think it kind of depends on the reader, but those would be two things I hope people will take away from this. Um,
Yeah, I learned so much in doing this research about um, how to be how to be better, how to treat people better, I think is what it comes down to, right? Like how to like even at my job or with my kid or whatever, that like, making sure that you're treating people like they matter and that they and that you mean it, right? Like that, actually, you know, letting other people matter to you is huge. And it's so um it can be really scary. And, I mean, and we talk about this in the book. It's so nerve-wracking to write about love because so much that people say about love is like, so trite or manipulative, right? And like Theresa was mentioning that, like, to people who are systemically abused or oppressed, being told like you have to be more loving can be very self negating, right? Like that you just have to love your abuser more and they'll stop abusing you. And that is not what we're saying. That's not the case, right? Like there's a really important role for allies, right? If someone is saying the world needs fewer trans people, or America needs fewer people of color, right? Like these are totally wrong, right? Like that is very much wrong. And it's not necessarily it's not necessarily the job of the people being targeted by those comments to be the ones to have to like try and make the case for their own existence, right? Like it's a terrible position to be in, and it's exhausting, and it's like you can just exist, right? That's where allies can come in and actually like intervene and say like, so where is this coming from? What are you worried about? Why are you like so, I read a column last week about how, all of the furor going on now around like trans girls in sports and public restrooms and things like that is this displaced fear of men's aggression, right? Like it's not trans girls and women who are harming cis girls and women, right? It's cis men and boys, but to actually like take on the way that we raise men and boys to have to like constantly prove they're men by being aggressive is actually causing the problem. But that just seems too big to deal with. And a lot of people are happy with that and don't want to have to deal with that. They just want to be like, look over there, look at them, that's the problem. And, like for allies to come in and be like, okay, why are you so worked up about this? You're talking about a tiny, vulnerable portion of the population that is not hurting people. Like, what are you talking about? To have that conversation is something that allies can do. And if they can do it from a place of listening, not to be like, oh, now I agree with you. Thank you so much for teaching me. But like, what is the concern behind it? And like to help people kind of resolve whatever the tension is that's making them dehumanize other people, right? Martin Luther King pointed out, like dehumanizing other people takes work, right? Like that, there's a tension in that because human beings are created for relationships. We're created in relationships. And so, allies can be the ones who, help to try and defuse that, or to, kind of turn the heat down on some of that. But, coming from a place of love, like you matter too, right? No one is saying that like girls who play volleyball don't matter, right? So where is this fear coming from? What is this about? That doesn't have to be trans people having that conversation, right? Allies have a role to play.
So, Dawne and Theresa, thanks so much for all your work. It's a very interesting book. Thanks for joining us, and many congratulations. I know how much work it takes to put out a book, so thank you for doing that. Again, the title is Choosing Love, What LGBTQ plus Christians Can Teach Us All About Relationships, Inclusion, and Justice. Learn more at Oxford Press, which is academic.oup.com. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having us. It's been a
Thanks.
pleasure.
Yeah.